Matt, guess what day it is?
I was ready for it only because 10 seconds before we were going live, I'm like, oh, wait, it's Wednesday. Here it comes. I was only ready for it 10 seconds before the show. If that tells you how often, for some reason, I forget about it when I know you're going to do it every single morning.
Matt, guess what day it is?
It is Wednesday, January 10th, a.k.a. closer to your birthday than mine.
My birthday has passed. My birthday's passed. I went over, so therefore it is next to ends up winning. But hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this wonderful Wednesday, and welcome to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington, our producer, Kevin Fowler in the building. We're live from 4 to 6 as well. So, Matt, busy show coming up today on Sports Now. A lot of news going across all of the major sports across the United States. Of course, college basketball, big night last night. We saw number 2 Houston go down. The Cincinnati Bearcats ended up losing as well. And we also will see the Ohio State Buckeyes host Wisconsin coming up later tonight. And then moving forward into that, still some big names on the Major League Baseball free agency market. We're getting to that, hour number 2 of the show. And some continuing moves across the National Football League. Black Monday has turned into Black Tuesday, Black Wednesday, and ultimately it's just that dark time the week after the regular season where all these NFL coaches are on the move and moving elsewhere, especially for the teams that did not make the NFL playoffs. They're trying to get a head start on the offseason than all the teams that did make the playoffs. But, Matt, before we get into our show, happy Wednesday. Hope you're having a great day. Happy to see your face across the side of the table for me.
And, yeah, one thing you brought up, Houston, the last undefeated team in college basketball falling to Iowa State last night. It felt like, obviously, it was very possible that Houston could go on an undefeated run this year. It would have been tough with the fact that they're now in the Big 12, but felt like it was only a matter of time before the Cougars ended up getting their first loss of the year. But I think Purdue also lost last night. I forget exactly who it might have been Nebraska. That might have been who they were playing last night. But a lot of teams in the top 10 taking some tough losses this past week, or this, I would say, past few days. So, like I said, with Houston, it felt like it was only a matter of time before we saw the Cougars end up losing their first basketball game of the regular season. And who else to do it? Iowa State, a team that it's kind of been a little bit on the bubble, I would say, of being a top 25 team. But Houston, last undefeated team in college basketball, fell last night.
Matt, certainly. We're getting into talking about Houston here in just a little bit. And obviously, as ultimately what you alluded to on Monday, you said that when we were talking about the top 25, if Dayton ends up taking down Duquesne this Friday, they practically will be the next man in, or the next team into the top 25. But now with Iowa State winning, they're now 12-3, beating the number 2 team in the entire nation. That may throw a wrench in the University of Dayton plans, and some other teams that are on the bubble on the outside looking in. So it might take a little bit longer for the Flyers, but we also have to pay attention to teams 20 through 25 because there could be multiple teams that fall out as well. So certainly a lot to talk about when it comes to who's on the bubble of the top 25 and who is in the top 25. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But first, let's talk about another team who was on the bubble on the outside looking in. Number 29, if the AP poll was extended to 30, it would have been the University of Cincinnati Bearcats coming off a big win on the road against number 12 BYU. They were hosting number 25, the Texas Longhorns last night. A big game for the Cincinnati Bearcats and a game that could have pushed them into the top 25 as well, but they fall 74-73. They will be playing at Baylor this upcoming Saturday. 74-73 loss against Texas. And ultimately, that was a game that UC should have won. And Texas, that was a game that they trailed the majority of that game, but they ended up hitting the ultimate game winner with 6 seconds left to play.
And yeah, you take a look at UC, obviously losing a game to a top 25 team at home due to a not last second shot, but a shot that was buried to give Texas a lead late in the game. I'll tell you what, there is a bounce back game coming up for the UC Bearcats. They're on the road against Baylor, who currently is number 14 in the country. So talking about Cincinnati taking down BYU, I mean, you take a look at the season so far that they've put together. Lost to Texas, top 25 team. Lost to UD, the first team out of the top 25, and then lost to Xavier out of the Big East in a rivalry matchup, and you only lost that game by 5. You take a look at all the games that UC has played so far this year, I don't think this loss to Texas hurts them that much when it comes to them vying for a spot inside the top 25. Obviously, it might slow down their progress to being a top 25 team, but a 1-point loss to Texas, a team that was inside the top 25, a tough team that ended up coming away. And like you said, you take a look at the entire rundown of the game, UC was in control for a majority of the game. They just fell short near the end. So this Bearcats team, losing by 1 last night, like I said, especially if they take down Baylor on the road in their next game, if UC can take down the Bears, there's no reason this Bearcats team shouldn't be in the conversation and shouldn't be a top 25 team. Obviously, that loss to Texas hurts, but a win against BYU and a potential win against Baylor, I think that cancels that loss to Texas out completely.
And certainly, as you mentioned, Baylor, they are one of the top 25 teams in the entire nation. They are ranked. And when you look at Baylor upcoming this Saturday, it's on the road in Waco, Texas. And this loss last night for the Cincinnati Bearcats, we will truly see what this team for the Bearcats is made out of. Because if the Bearcats are able to bounce back rather quickly in just a couple of days' time to go take down the Bears on the road, without a doubt, I think that just as you mentioned, those 2 losses, you say that they're cancel out. I actually think that they're going to gain a little bit more respect from the committee because those games that they won were on the road. And now, Matt, another factor, the UC Bearcats right now, their men's basketball team, it seems like they're at a crossroads. They can go down the right path in the right direction, bounce back, beat Baylor, and then re-enter that conversation as, hey, this team may deserve to be in the top 25, and we may see them ranked as early as next week, or it puts them back on track to maybe be ranked here within the next couple of weeks. But, Matt, another thing that you got to talk about, and this is really where I'm coming from, the Bearcats, you are going to see how mature they are. You're going to see how truly mature of a team that they are. Because remember, when they had that heartbreaking defeat to Dayton, the coaching staff even and some of the players even came out and said that shook their confidence a little bit. It took them a couple of games to get that confidence back, and then it all ultimately ended up paying off in a game where they ended up taking down BYU. But Matt, when you look at this loss against Texas and how they lost this game, this is a point in your season where you can completely spiral out of control and go on a decline because that was a devastating loss and you have another top 25 team coming up this Saturday, or you can look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, they beat us, let's bounce back, and you forget about that loss, you take the positives from it, and you go down and beat Baylor. This is a big game and a pivotal game for the Bearcats season, and I know a lot of people want to look at this from hey, this is a game that could put them in the top 25. This is a game that could get them put some more on their resume. It's a game that can help their record, not just in the Big 12, but also overall. But when you look at this from a mental standpoint, this is the biggest game the Bearcats have played all season long. And it doesn't even matter about their opponent. It's, can they bounce back? Have they matured enough through this season after talking about that loss to UD and how that shook their confidence and it took them a few games to bounce back? Did that teach them? Has this team learned? Has this team matured enough to suffer a devastating loss on a Tuesday night against a top 25 team and then go beat another top 25 team on the road? Because playing in the Big 12, there's multiple teams that are ranked in the top 25 or on the bubble. It's not going to be the first time that this series and this situation happens for the Bearcats this season and in the future of the Big 12 as well. Big game coming up for the Bearcats against Baylor. I'd like to see them right the ship. I'd like to see them get back on track against the Baylor Bears, a very good team on the road.
And yeah, you talk about all the teams inside of the Big 12. I mean, I think if my math is right, there's 6 teams currently inside the top 25 when it comes to the updated college basketball rankings, and then you've got 3 of those teams inside the top 9, Oklahoma being 9, Houston being 2, Kansas being number 3. So you just take a look at how tough the Big 12 is, and then you also have, obviously, UC being just on the outside of the top 25, Texas Tech being just on the outside of the top 25, Iowa State has been in talks of being inside the top 25, but they're just on the outside of it. So there's a lot of teams inside of the Big 12 right now that even if they're not a top 25 team, they are a top 30 to 40 team in all of college basketball. So talking about UC so far this year, obviously, it's been successful. I mean, you take a look, only 3 losses on the year after that loss to Texas. And then outside of that, like I said, your only other losses are to Xavier, which is a rivalry game down in the Cincinnati area, and Xavier's coming out of the Big East, one of the toughest conferences to play in all of college basketball. And then the other loss being to UD, and if you extend it to the top 26, UD is that 26th team. So you take a look at the season that Cincinnati's put together so far, and it's me kind of bringing up the point I talked about earlier. Especially if they take down Baylor, I even think that with the loss to Texas at home by 1, I don't think that hurts them really at all, because Texas, a top 25 team, has been in the Big 12 for a while. They've played very, very tough competition consistently in the Big 12 for quite some time. And then UC is a new dog into the Big 12, and they're already being considered one of the top teams in the conference, and they're already being considered a top 25 team in their first year in the Big 12. I think a 1-point loss to Texas, that's going to be a game as the UC Bearcat season goes goes down the road of, man, it would have been nice if we got that win, but it's in the past. Let's keep playing basketball. And if Cincinnati has that mindset going on the road against Baylor, it's very possible this UC team can take down the Bears. And then would not surprise me, we talk about UD potentially being a top 25 team. If UC takes down Baylor, I wouldn't be surprised if next week we're talking about UC potentially being a top 25 team.
And Matt, you take a look at the UC Bearcats and that game against Texas yesterday, 74-73. They were holding on to the lead for a while. They were down by 2 at halftime. They played really well in that second half, but ultimately it came down to a final shot by Texas. 6 seconds to go, which ultimately ended up being the game winner in a game that had 11,000 fans. Matt, I don't know if you saw Fifth Third Arena at the center of Cincinnati, the University of Cincinnati. They did a stripe out event just as the Cincinnati Bengals did against the Bills on Sunday Night Football ways back, and it turned out beautiful. But here's the key point in this game, and this could tell me that not just UC played hard, but both teams played hard. 14 lead changes and 14 different times that this game was tied during the game. It was back and forth. It was back and forth. It was a close game all the way throughout. Cincinnati, just at the end of the day, could not make as many plays as Texas did to be able to take down Texas and the Longhorns to punch their ticket. And I'm not going to say into the top 25, but give them a better chance, because without a doubt about it, if Cincinnati was able to win this game, then beat Baylor on the road, no question in mind, they'd be a top 25 team in the nation. They very well could have been a top 20 team in the nation if that were to happen. That's not the case. Bounce back game against Saturday. And I said it once, I'll say it again. This is the biggest game that UC will play this season up until this point.
And yeah, like you just mentioned, you talk about UC's season so far this year. Obviously, tough loss to Xavier, tough loss to Dayton. But you take a look at the fact that after those games that Cincinnati played against 2 in-state opponents, and those were their only losses going into essentially the game against Texas last night, lost to Xavier by 5. Immediately after, didn't have a tough opponent, but they won by 32 points. Then they went and lost to UD, came back and won by 16 points against another opponent that isn't really the toughest of opponents that they're going to play at all this season. So now you take a look at 9-point win against BYU. Then you've got a 1-point loss against Texas. This is one of those games that for UC, like you said, it's not to stop themselves from spiraling out of control, but if you win this game, it's only going to give your team more confidence, especially with the fact that after this game against Baylor, you've got TCU, and then your 2 follow-up games after the Horned Frogs is Oklahoma and Kansas, number 9 and number 3 in the country as we speak. It's safe to say this game for UC, you talk about it potentially being a game that could either propel their season forward to being a top 25 team or cause a potential spiral downward. I would say it guaranteed and 110% would be a game that could cause a spiral out of control as if Oklahoma and Kansas were immediately after. The game against TCU could be a little bit of a bounce-back game if they don't take down Baylor. But it also, this game right here against Baylor coming up, does have a lot of implications as to what the Bearcats should be feeling going into their game against TCU, their home game against Oklahoma, and then the road game against Kansas coming up.
It is time for a break. When we return, we'll continue this talk about college basketball, but we'll shift our focus away from the Bearcats and the Ohio State Buckeyes trying to avenge a loss that they had against Indiana, upcoming tonight at home against Wisconsin. We're getting into all of that and more coming up next on Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Back here on Sports Now, 4:18 p.m. Eastern Time. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington as we welcome you back. Matt, let's go in. Let's continue our talk about college basketball, but let's shift our focus away from the UC Bearcats and let's start talking about the Ohio State Buckeyes. Just as we mentioned, the UC Bearcats, a heartbreaking loss last night. Now they're going to have a pivotal point in their season against the very good basketball team in Baylor, who's ranked number 14 in the entire nation. You can almost say the same thing with Ohio State. A heartbreaking defeat last Saturday on the road in Bloomington against the Indiana Hoosiers. They lose that one 71-65. Indiana, obviously one of the top programs in the entire country. They've been that way for quite some time. Although that they haven't had the season that they've won in so far this season, they're still always one of the top recruits. They're always still one of the top programs that even when they're not having a season as they wanted to, they're still a scary team to watch out for. Heartbreaking loss on the road against Indiana. Now you're back at home and you take on Wisconsin, who may not be number 14 in the entire country like Baylor is, but they're number 15 in the entire country. A big pivotal game for Ohio State and a game that they could certainly use to build some confidence before they head to Michigan to take on the Michigan Wolverines next Monday night.
And yeah, it's kind of eerily similar how it seems the season has gone for both UC and Ohio State, even to the fact that you take a look at the loss to Texas A&M for Ohio State. They played Merrimack immediately after and won pretty convincingly. UC, I think it was their loss to UD, came out and played Merrimack immediately after that loss to UD and ended up winning that game convincingly. But all that aside, lost to Penn State, bounced back against UCLA. Lost to Indiana. For Ohio State, they're hoping this can be a bounce-back game against Wisconsin. For them, it's not as tough of a slate, and it's not it wouldn't be as easy convincing people saying that if Ohio State lost this game against Wisconsin, it's going to spiral their season out of control, because then they've got Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, Northwestern. Their next ranked opponent is Illinois, who they play Tuesday, January 30th. So it's a little bit of time between now and then that they have to get their season back on track and start winning some basketball games. For UC, on the other hand, after their Baylor game, they've got TCU. That's their only unranked opponent between their games against Oklahoma, Kansas, and Baylor. So talking about both teams, talking about the seasons that both of them had, it's kind of interesting how similar things are going right now for both UC and Ohio State. And that makes me and brings up my idea, and I've talked about it quite a few times. Feels like for Ohio State, UC, and UD, we haven't talked about the Flyers yet, but they don't play until Friday against Duquesne. But talking about all three of those teams, like I've said, I've talked about it for quite some time now. It feels like it's not if they're going to be a top 25 team. It's almost a question of when are we going to see these three teams be put inside the top 25. It's only a matter of time before Ohio State finds their way into the top 25, especially if they can take down Wisconsin. It's only going to be a matter of time before UC, with how they've played so far this year, finds themselves inside the top 25. And with UD being the first team out of the top 25, it's very possible that they take down Duquesne. Some craziness happens for the teams between, I'd say, 18th and 25th, like we've already seen happen a little bit this week. Colorado State just lost a game to Boise State last night. There's a lot of movement that we can still see happen. And like I said, it's only a matter of time before we see, I would say, there's probably going to be a point during the season, and it might even be within the next few weeks, all three of these teams could be top 25 teams.
Yeah, Matt. And one thing that I want to mention, Ohio State, they've always, so far this season, they have consistently been on the bubble on the outside looking in. They've been in that same conversation, but they've been knocked out and, in fact, receiving no AP poll votes towards being a top 25 team. So right now, they have completely fallen out of the picture. But I will say this, Ohio State can use this to their advantage. They can use this to their advantage because there's not as much stress. So there's not as much pressure. And when you look at Ohio State and what the Buckeyes can do, that's when they play their best basketball. Matt, they've struggled in Big Ten play over the last couple of years. Right now, they're 2-2 in conference play. Ohio State, this could be a team that we find, especially with what conference they play in, the Big Ten. This is a team that if they can continue to win basketball games, it does not matter how they're going to do in the Big Ten tournament. They can punch their ticket into March Madness, which is what Ohio State needs to do if they want to get to the tournament. This is a team that thrives when there's no pressure put on them. When there's pressure put on them and expectations are a little bit higher, that's when we see them struggle a little bit. Heading into that game on a Saturday against Indiana, they were expected to win that game. Guess what? Things did not necessarily go their way. They lose by 6. Ohio State, they play, and you could say this with anything that we all do, Matt. I do this myself. We all perform best when there's not as much pressure. But that's what Ohio State does. And playing in the Big Ten, it's going to bring you a lot of pressure. So this is a big game upcoming against Wisconsin. Ohio State, right now, they're not on the map. They're not on the bubble. But this is a game that if they were able to win this game, they can put themselves right back on the map, right back in the bubble, and right back in that conversation where they'll be in the bubble on the outside looking in. And just as you mentioned, Matt, I completely agree with you. If this is a Buckeyes team that can continue to win, this is a team that can still continue to find themselves in the top 25, I'd say as soon as 2 or 3 weeks, especially with who they have coming up. But Ohio State, they cannot falter in conference play like they did over the last couple of seasons. Important game. But if they fall below 500 in conference play, I know that they've had a tough schedule to start, but if they fall below 500, it's going to play a mental game for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and that's a game that Ohio State does not want to play because then they will start to add that not needed pressure, just as I was talking about, onto themselves, and it could completely derail this team. This is a big game coming up tonight. You're at home against Wisconsin. You have your home faithful backing you up. You got to get a home victory, especially after that devastating loss on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the whole conference play conversation and the conference play talk for Ohio State. This isn't just a big game when it comes down to confidence for the team, potentially putting this team inside the top 25. You take a look at the standings in the Big Ten right now. Ohio State conference record is 2-2. They are 500 in conference play. There is one team in the Big Ten who has not lost a conference game yet this year. That is number 15, Wisconsin. They are 3-0 in conference right now, 11-3 overall. But going back on the whole conference play talk and how tough the Big Ten is, take a look at the fact that Ohio State, Indiana, Nebraska, Purdue, Northwestern, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin are all inside of the Big Ten, all fighting for those better seeds when it comes to the Big Ten tournament at the end of the regular season. All those teams I just listed off have 11 or more wins on the season. And the most we've seen any of those teams play is 16 games on the year. The worst record of all of those teams is Indiana at 11-5. Outside of all those teams, you have one team in the entire conference below 500. That's Michigan. They are at 6-9. Penn State's 8-7. Iowa's 9-6. Maryland, they're 9-6. Michigan State, Rutgers, they are also 9-6 for themselves as well. This Big Ten conference, it doesn't matter who you are, it is going to be tough to be a better seeded team when it comes to the Big Ten tournament at the end of the regular season and once the regular season comes to a close. And that, I wouldn't say that's going to guarantee more Big Ten teams into March Madness, but that's only going to make the run to potentially being the postseason Big Ten tournament champion. That's only going to make the run to that title even more difficult for, I would even say, teams like Purdue and teams like Illinois, who are more towards the upper echelon of the top 25 rankings for the country coming out of the Big Ten. It's safe to say the Big Ten Conference is going to be a gauntlet to run through no matter what team it is, whether it's Purdue. I mean, we've already seen Purdue so far this year. They've only lost 2 games. Those games are against Nebraska and Northwestern. Nebraska 13-3, Northwestern 11-3, and Northwestern has only just recently lost a few games they shouldn't have, and that's the only reason they're not a top 25 team in the country. Nebraska, they're knocking on the door of being a top 25 team in the country. So it's safe to say the Big Ten feels like it's going to be like almost every other year in the conference. Once conference play happens, we are going to see these teams beat the crap out of each other constantly in conference games, and I'm excited to see how it pans out once the season comes to a close.
Matt, get this. You were talking about all the success in the Big Ten this season for college basketball, men's college basketball. How about 8 of their teams already in double-digit amount of wins? 8 of their teams in double-digit amount of their wins, and on top of that, 4 teams have a chance to get to double-digit wins within their next game. Iowa, Maryland, Michigan State, Rutgers, they're all 9-6. That leaves 2 teams in the Big Ten that have not won 9 or more games. And Matt, we're only sitting right now at game 14, 15 on the season. So seeing that there's only one team in the Big Ten below 500 being Michigan. I guess Michigan, they've dumped all their attention into football, which rightfully so. They just won the national championship. But now they have to go focus on their basketball team, and it's been a struggle for the Michigan Wolverines. But again, when you look at Ohio State and their struggles in conference play, you always talk about the most important games that you play, and no matter what level you are, whether you're in high school, whether you're in college, whether you're playing professional, you have got to win divisional games or it can completely derail your season. Look at what Ohio State did last year outside of the conference. 9-3 out of conference record, but this was a team that struggled in conference. I believe they only won 2 or 3 games all season long in conference. I could be a little bit mistaken in that. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but and, you know, going on, and let's continue to preach about how divisional and conference games are so important. I'm going to shift focus over to the Reds real quick. Cincinnati Reds, they win more in division games last season. They end up making the playoffs. They had a horrible record in the NL Central. The Bengals, they were 1-5 in the AFC North this season. You win another division game, you find yourself in the playoffs. So divisional and conference games are the most important. And Ohio State, this is a team that has struggled in these conference games over the last couple of years. This is an important game coming up against Wisconsin because they have yet to play Penn State for that second time. Penn State already beat them. They've yet to play Nebraska. They've yet to play Northwestern. They've yet to play Illinois. They've yet to play Iowa. They've yet to play Maryland. They have, as of right now, yet to play Wisconsin. They haven't played Purdue. They haven't played Michigan State. This is a very, very tough Big Ten conference for Ohio State, and how you want to attack these conference games is you want to attack it with confidence. And a way to get confidence, take down at home, rely on your home crowd, and take down the Wisconsin Badgers. This is a must-win game tonight in Ohio State terms, not really necessarily from a season aspect, for a mental and confidence aspect, just like the Bearcats we were talking about a little bit ago, to propel themselves through the rest of the season in a very, very tough slate of conference games.
And yeah, talking about Ohio State, I feel like we've got to give a little bit of praise and a little bit of talking towards Minnesota and the season they've put together so far this year. You take a look at last year, very bottom of the conference, only 9 wins total. a season ago. Their conference record was 2-17 last year. They're 3-1 in conference right now. Obviously, conference play very, very early when it comes to the amount of conference games each team has played, but 12-3 right now. 3 more wins this season through 15 games than they had all of last year. Talking about how tough the Big Ten Conference is when you have the worst team a season ago be one of the best teams in the conference this year so far up until this point. Safe to say you're playing in a very tough conference.
It is time for a break. More college basketball coming up next. The Wright State Raiders, hey, they have another great game. They have another game coming up tonight, a chance to get over 500. We'll talk about them and more coming up next on Sports Now.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi! How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe. And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe. And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Back here on Sports Now, we're talking some college basketball as we welcome you back, 4:35 p.m. Eastern Time. For all of you listeners out there on the radio side of things, quick time update. Hopefully we have not hit rush hour traffic yet. But if you did, that just means you're trapped in a car longer with nothing else to do but listen to us.
And deal with us. So if that's the scenario, have fun. That's all that can be said.
The Wright State Raiders, they are back in action tonight at 8-8 so far on the season. We've talked about them multiple times on this show, Matt. Wright State, one of the best offenses, if not the best offenses in the entire country, but one of the worst defenses, if not the worst defense in the entire country. They're 8-8. They're right in the thick of things for Horizon League play. They got a big game coming up tonight against Robert Morris.
Yeah, I would say it's safe to say easily inside of the Horizon League, Wright State has the best offense of all the teams, averaging 85 points a game. I think it's like around 84.5 to 84.8, something around those numbers. But you take a look at this team as a whole, there's one thing that's plagued Wright State, though, all season long, and it's that defense. When you take a look at the offense, you've got Trey Calvin averaging 19.9 points a game. You have Tanner Holden averaging 17.1 points per game. Brandon Noel averaging 13.8 points per game. A.J. Brown, 10.5 points per game. You just see the top 4 scorers for this Wright State Raiders team. That's not even to mention the other 3 players on the roster that are also averaging above 5 points a game per year so far for this Wright State Raiders team. The number was 84.4 points per game so far during this season. But you just take a look at if it's any team, it doesn't matter if it's Kansas, it doesn't matter if it's Detroit, it doesn't matter what Chicago State, it doesn't matter if it's Houston. If you're put up 84.8 points per game, you've got one of the best offenses when it comes to basketball in the entire country. So for this Wright State team, putting up 84.8 points per game, you would assume, hearing that number, maybe this Wright State team has 12 to 13, maybe 14 wins on the year and only a handful of losses. But they're 8-8. That goes to show that the defense needs improvement for Wright State if they want to have a chance of potentially being the regular season champion of the Horizon League and potentially even winning the Horizon League tournament at the end of the season. Because, like you said earlier a couple different times on this show, Jackson, whoever wins the Horizon League tournament at the end of the year will make it into the March Madness tournament, but that's probably going to be it. Maybe if Purdue-Fort Wayne doesn't lose a game throughout the remainder of the year and loses to, say, Youngstown State in the Horizon League championship or tournament championship game, it's possible there could be conversations to put Purdue-Fort Wayne into the tournament. But even then, it feels like it might be a little bit of a stretch. So talking about the Horizon League and talking about the standings and the fact that there's currently 8 teams under a 1-game blanket right now in conference, it's safe to say for Wright State, if they want to be successful and they want to be that team coming out of the Horizon League, making it into the tournament at the end of the year, they've got to get that defense right. And if not, Wright State's season's probably going to end in the Horizon League tournament.
And Matt, if they get the defense right and trending in the right direction, this is a Wright State team that can make it far, not just in the Horizon League tournament, but also, I'm going to say, NCAA March Madness, because when you have players such as Tanner Holden and Trey Calvin leading the offense, it's very hard to stop both of them. And if Wright State's hitting their shots, they're firing on all cylinders, this is a team that I can certainly see making a run for the Horizon League title and maybe a possible Cinderella run in the NCAA March Madness tournament. But Wright State, I mean, it hurts to say, but they're 8-8 on the season. When was the last time that you've seen a Horizon League team that did not win the conference at 8 losses make it into March Madness? It doesn't happen. There's teams in the Horizon League in the past couple of years who will be a 4 to 5 loss team, will not win the Horizon League, and still will not make it into March Madness. And that's just the hard reality for March Madness in the Horizon League. The Horizon League is a smaller conference in the NCAA at the Division I level, and obviously every single conference winner has to find their way into March Madness. But Matt, even when Wright State won the Horizon League a couple of years ago and they made it into March Madness, they had to play in the first 4 as the 16 seed. So that just goes to show you what the Horizon League is. It's a small conference, and I got to give props and I have to give credit for the Wright State Raiders going out there and trying to play and playing Colorado State, playing Indiana, and giving them their all. Obviously, they lost pretty big to Colorado State. They lost by 9 against Indiana, but they have stacked their out-of-conference schedule to try to make, if they were able to win those games, we may be talking a little bit differently about the Wright State Raiders. But Matt, the sad reality and the hard truth is, at the end of the day, the Horizon League's such a small conference, and more than likely the team that we see winning the Horizon League tournament still won't be above a 13 seed. It's been a long time since anybody in the Horizon League's been able to accomplish that. Wright State, 8 losses already on the season. The only way that they will find themselves playing in the NCAA tournament is going to be winning the Horizon League. So right now, you're playing your regular season to try to make tournament play in the Horizon League a lot easier and a lot better. You know how you can do that? You win. The higher seed you get into the Horizon League tournament, the less games you have to play. And some of the easier teams in the conference, you have to play really up until the semifinals. Wright State, this is an important game coming up against Robert Morris. This is a game that I'm expecting them to win on the road. Wright State, and not to mention the fact that this is a team that can dominate the Horizon League. This is a team that can win the conference and win the tournament. But as of right now, they have got to find a way to get that defense trending in the right direction. If they can do that, and also not only that, if they can start playing better on defense, it's going to help them out on offense as well. Because think about how many turnovers and how many more possessions they're going to get with them playing better defense on the defensive side.
And yeah, you talk about this Wright State team, and you take a look at the out-of-conference schedule that they put together this year. Obviously, tough slates of games. You've got Western Kentucky in the mix. You've got Davidson, Indiana, Toledo, Colorado State. Indiana, not a top 25 team at the moment, but they've been making their case for a little bit of time now that they might be a team that is worthy of a top 25 spot. Colorado State, currently inside the top 25. Only, I think, 2 losses on the year right now for Colorado State, and that was the first game of the year. I would say for Wright State, talking about the out-of-conference schedule and how tough it was, it would have been possible to see Wright State if they, say, only lost to Colorado State and Indiana and maybe had a loss to Davidson thrown into the mix or a loss to Western Kentucky thrown into the mix. But then they would have had to have been perfect outside of that to be considered a team that you mentioned when it comes to the Horizon League. It's win the Horizon League tournament at the end of the year or you're not making it in. For the Raiders, if they, like I said, only lost to Colorado State, only lost to Indiana, maybe throw in another loss to, say, a Toledo or a Davidson or a Western Kentucky, and then absolutely swept everybody else throughout the regular season, including Purdue-Fort Wayne, when it comes to conference play, and then lost in the Horizon League championship game, there would have been conversations of maybe Wright State might deserve to be a team that in a smaller conference didn't win the conference tournament, but they still played one heck of a season, and they should still be in March Madness. That's not the case. The Raiders are 8-8 right now. They've lost more games than, like I said, when you're putting up almost 85 points a game, you would expect your team to at least 16 games into the year have double digits at the worst, putting up those kinds of numbers. Like you said earlier, and like I've said a couple different times, if Wright State can figure out the defense, it's not just that that's going to help the team's record. It's not that that's just going to help the team's confidence. That's just going to help, I would say, every Wright State Raider fan out there having to watch the defense be on the floor and wonder whether or not the offense is going to be able to keep up the production that they're playing at to keep their team in games. And it's going to help the players as well when it comes to the confidence level that they're going to get. It's going to help and put into their minds that, okay, defense, we're starting to step it up a little bit on the defensive side, so obviously, we want to keep scoring at will like we pretty much have all season long, but it's not required for us to win these games. So for Wright State, if the defense can find a way to improve and if the defense can find a way to step up, it's safe to say this Raiders team, especially come Horizon League tournament at the end of the year, it's safe to say this Raiders team could easily make it into the tournament, but they've got to get that defense fixed.
Time for a break. When we return, the Xavier Musketeers, it seems like every team that we talk about in our region of Ohio, Southwest Ohio, it seems like every team outside of the Dayton Flyers, who their next game will be against Duquesne on Friday, it seems like every team has a big game that was either played last night or tonight. Xavier, we talk about the teams trying to get their season back on track. The Musketeers, 7-7, they host number 4 UConn tonight. That and more coming up next to Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
As we were talking about a little bit before the break, the Xavier Musketeers, a big win, or I beg your pardon, a big game upcoming against the Yukon Huskies tonight at the Cintas Center. Matt, as we've talked about now, we look at it, like I said before going to the break, it seems like every team in the Southwest region and the state of Ohio, frankly, that we cover is having big games currently right now as we speak. But Matt, we talk about the Xavier Musketeers, 7-7 season. Who does that remind you of? A team we just talked about, Wright State. Big game to find a way to possibly turn their season in the positive direction. We talked about teams that also have big games that could turn their season into a better direction, such as Ohio State and UC earlier on in the show. The Xavier Musketeers, for the last couple of years of college basketball, have been a staple point for the sport. They have been one of the best teams. They've been one of the best programs, and they have been one of the top programs in the entire nation. They proved that last season when they were the number 2 seed and went all the way to the Elite 8. The Xavier Musketeers, yes, they lost a lot of seniors last season, but Matt, hot take, maybe it's my hot take for later on, maybe it's not. This is a team that is just as good as the team that they had last season. Although they're only 7-7 so far this season, you look at who they played. They're coming off a 1-point loss against Villanova. They kept Houston very close. They were able to beat UC, and we talk about how great UC is. They lost very close to Oakland, and Oakland a very good team. They lost very close to Washington. Washington a very good team. They kept it close against Purdue. They lost by 12. Purdue was able to pull away in the last couple of minutes. This is a game that Xavier coming up tonight against UConn. UConn, number 4 in the entire nation. This is a game that they can win, and we talk about a confidence when it comes to college basketball. If Xavier's able to rely on their home crowd, win this game at home, it's going to build a lot more confidence for the Xavier Musketeers. And unlike the Horizon League, the Big East is one of the best, if not arguably the best conference in all of college basketball over the last couple of years. With how things are going this season, I'm thinking Big 12. Matt, I'm sure you're probably thinking the same thing, but the Big East is up there. You can make an argument that the Big East is one of, if not the best conferences when it comes to college basketball. if Xavier were to beat UConn and get some confidence and go on a run against, they have Providence coming up, Butler coming up, Georgetown coming up, Creighton coming up before they play UConn again here in a couple of weeks. Xavier, all it takes for them is going on a nice little run, because unlike the Horizon League, the Big East is a tougher conference that if Xavier did not win the Big East but still only had a 10-loss season or so, this is a team that we could still see find themselves playing in March Madness through the NCAA tournament in March.
And yeah, I forget when we had that little argument of best conference in college basketball, but I remember at that time I pitched my tent under the Big 12 banner in the sky, and you pitched your tent kind of in between, I think, the Big 12 and the Big East banner.
At the beginning of the year, I leaned more towards the Big East, but the Big 12 this season, there's been some emergence of some teams that I personally have not foreseen. So I did not predict that at the beginning of the year, but with the emergence of those teams, I don't think it's a no-brainer for me, at least, that the Big 12 is the most dominant conference in all of basketball. But right behind them, I'd say the Big East. The Big East, they have a very good conference, and that's what really helps Xavier out. That unlike the Horizon League, you already lose 7 games in the Horizon League. You're practically done unless you win the conference. Xavier, on the other hand, they get a little bit more leeway.
And yeah, I was just about to bring that up. It's obvious right now, Big 12 is, I wouldn't say the staple for college basketball, but pretty much right behind them. If it was a 100-meter dash, they're mere inches behind them. It's the Big East. So you talk about Xavier currently being 7-7 on the year, taking a 1-point loss to Villanova. Pretty big win against Seton Hall, who Seton Hall has some pretty big wins on the season. I'm pretty sure they took down UConn and Marquette so far this year. So the Pirates of Seton Hall, not an easy team. They beat them by 20. And then you've got St. John's, a 15-point loss in that game for the Musketeers. Those were both road games that they lost in conference against Villanova and against St. John's. They've got a home game against UConn. This is absolutely a winnable game for the Musketeers. I would say when it comes down to, we talked about the conversation for spiraling a season out of control. For Xavier, it's not too much of it spiraling the season out of control because they're already a 7-loss team at the moment. It wouldn't be like a UC or an Ohio State like we were talking about, teams with 10-plus wins that if they lose this upcoming game, they're going to end up being a team right around 500 in the next month or so. So for Xavier, I would say when it comes down to the implications of this game against UConn, it's a little bit more in the conversation that I was talking about with Ohio State, that a loss would hurt, but it's not going to completely spiral their season out of control because they've got Providence on the road, Butler at home, Georgetown at home. Providence, the tougher game of those 3, because they were just inside the top 25. They just got bumped out. They were one of the 3 teams that got taken out of the top 25. So for Xavier, and then after those 3 games, they've got Creighton on the road. So pretty tough road games, I would say, for this Xavier Musketeers team upcoming. But this game against UConn is totally, and it is completely a winnable game for the Musketeers. And if they get this win, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a win again on their schedule and on the ESPN little schedule that they have on the left side. We see a win against UConn. We see a win for that game against Providence. We see a win for the game against Butler, win for the game against Georgetown, win for the game against Creighton, and then they might lose when they play UConn immediately after on their road game. On, I think it's Sunday, January 28th is the day of the week that game is. So taking a look at what Xavier's got coming up on their schedule, they've got UConn, obviously, coming up tonight. Massive game for this Musketeers team. But I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility that if they lose this game tonight, they find a way to bounce back against Providence and then go on a little bit of a win streak. But you want to talk about a confidence boost for a team that's 7-7 right now on the year, and they've played some pretty tough opponents so far this year. I mean, you talk about Villanova earlier on in the season. They were top 25 team. Cincinnati, they're knocking on the door of being a top 25 team. Xavier's got to win. And then you take a look at the fact that Purdue, Houston, that is currently number 1 and number 2 in the country, lost, combining the points that they lost both of those games by, it's 14 points to number 1 and number 2 in the country right now. That's all you need to know about this Xavier team. The record does not show how good of a team this is. Another team they beat pretty early on in the year, St. Mary's, was the team that at the start of the year was a top 25 team. They beat them by 17. So this Musketeers team, they played very tough competition all season long. they've beaten teams that they should beat, and then there's some games that they should have won, but they fell just short. Game against Oakland, should have easily won that game. Game against Delaware, should have easily won that game. It can even possibly be brought up that maybe they should have won the game against Washington, but the other games that they should have won, they've dominated their competition. So this Musketeers team, you talked about it and brought up, maybe you bring it up for the hot take segment that we got coming up later, but if it's a hot take segment, I'm jumping on that hot take boat as well, because I do think it's totally possible the Musketeers can take down UConn tonight.
Xavier, this is a team that the record does not represent them. They're averaging 74.6 points per game. Their opponents, 69.3 points per game. And Xavier, again, you look at their strength of schedule, you compare that to some others around college basketball, and it's tough to really deny that Xavier has one of the tougher schedules, in all of the entire nation. So the hate that has been thrown on Xavier, I'm not going to say maybe a little bit underrated, the Xavier Musketeers are, but I mean, when you look again, take a glance at the numbers. I mean, gander at who they've played, how they've played, how close they've played. Say what you want to say, but at the end of the day, the Xavier Musketeers are only I'm trying to find the words here. English isn't Englishing right now. The Xavier Musketeers are not like their record shows. Their record is a lot worse than how the Xavier Musketeers are. And this game tonight at home against UConn, the number 4 team in the entire nation, the reigning national champions as well, this could be a big win for the Xavier Musketeers to turn their season in the right direction. And hey, again, they're in the Big East. You go on a winning streak, you're right back in the thick of things when it comes to the talk of the top 25.
And yeah, talking about the Big East right now, I mean, you take a look at the overall records for all the teams, and you can kind of go into a little bit of a comparison with the Big Ten. You've only got DePaul, who is 3-12 on the year, and the Blue Demons are just not having a good year this year. 4 years ago, if you were to tell me that DePaul was 3-12, 15 games through the year, I would have thought you were crazy with how good their team has been in recent memory. But you just take a look at every other team. Xavier, Georgetown are both 500 on the year. Everybody else is a 10 or more win team. You have Butler 10-5. You have Marquette 11-4. Providence 11-4. You've also got St. John's there at 11-4. Villanova's 10-5. You've got Creighton at 12-4. You've got UConn at 13-2. You've got Seton Hall, who, believe it or not, of all the teams I just mentioned, they have the best conference record of everybody, which is at 4-1. And like I said, they've played UConn and they've played Marquette so far this year. So Seton Hall, they're 11-5 on the year. They're the number 1 team in the conference right now. It's safe to say the Big East is a very, very, very tough conference to play in. And like you said earlier, when it comes down to taking a look at Wright State, 8-loss team on the year, they are going to have to win their conference tournament at the end of the year too. They're going to have to win the Horizon League tournament to make it into March Madness. Xavier rings off a few wins against, say, Marquette, against UConn. It doesn't have to be winning the series against those teams, but they get a win against UConn. They get a win against Marquette. They get a win against Creighton. They win against Providence. I don't know if they play. I'm going to check and see if they play Seton Hall again this year, but they do play Seton Hall on the road the 14th of February. You just take a look at the schedule. They win a game or two against Marquette. They win a game or two against Creighton. They win a game or two against UConn. They win a game or two against Providence. They take down St. John's. They win. If they win more games than they lose throughout the remainder of the season and they win against some of the better teams in the Big East, Xavier can easily make it into the tournament without even winning the Big East tournament at the end of the year as well.
Matt, real quick before we go to break, I just saw something on Twitter, some breaking news that have come out, and it came out a little bit earlier today, but Denzel Burke is returning for the Ohio State Buckeyes, another key returner for Ohio State. Now we shift focus from college basketball to college football. Denzel Burke, their star defensive back, will be back with the Buckeyes next season. And Matt, we mentioned it a little bit ago, and we've talked about it multiple times on this show. Ohio State, they have a lot of players on that team after 3 straight losses to Michigan. They just have a bitter taste in their mouth. And we talk about the greatness of the culture that Ryan Day has provided with Ohio State football. And we've seen a lot of those defensive stars come back. We've yet to hear from some of the offensive names, though. But Ohio State, it seems like they're going to be returning a lot more than what was expected at the beginning of the offseason.
And yeah, I like I was saying a few different times, I heard it was around the 10th or so. I think I was saying it was between the 8th and the 12th is when I had heard that the announcement was going to be made. But happened, as you mentioned, not too long ago. And talking about that Ohio State defense, me as a diehard Buckeye fan, that makes me smile a little bit more and smile a little bit bigger knowing that Denzel Burke, our best cornerback, I would say him or Igbinozen have been the best cornerbacks that we've had this past year for Ohio State. But knowing that Burke is coming back, it's only going to bolster that defense, and it's only going to make that defense for Ohio State continue to play at the level we saw them play at last year.
It should be certainly fun to watch him back in scarlet and gray next season. Time for a break. We'll continue our college basketball talk coming up next when we return as we move forward in hour number 2 of this 2-hour show.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe. And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
number 2 of this 2-hour show. Well, maybe not quite hour number 2. We're a little bit past.
We're a little bit behind.
We're 7
schedule.
minutes behind.
Good job, Jackson. We're
We are
losing
a
track
little
of
bit-
time and everything. You can't. There's one thing, knowing you.
Respect your elders. This is the 3-week period where I am older than you. Respect your elders, young man.
The one thing I was going to say is usually when this type of stuff comes up, you always blame me, but you're the one running production right now, so I'm not in control of going to break and everything, so it's on you. I know you're older than me, and I must respect my elders.
Respect
but
your
it's on you,
elders.
Jackson. It's
Yep.
on you. It is all on you, 110% on you. You can't flip it and say it's my fault this time.
I'm in charge of production, I guess, today, so...
You're in charge of production every day. I just have my laptop to look up stuff. You've got the laptop to produce everything for the show. So mine, if
We
if
are
try,
looking for a intern to run production.
if you tried running production for a show on my laptop, you'd probably see some smoke and fire coming up from below
You
my
catch the
camera.
studio on fire.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be...
I'd burn the studio down. It wouldn't be a good idea. That's why we're using that laptop, not mine.
And sometimes this laptop, I'm scared, is going to catch on fire with how much we do.
That's something you're going to have to talk with Kevin about.
Yeah, we are looking for an intern production. Anybody's interested?
Wink.
Wink, wink.
Wink,
You know
wink,
where
you
to
know what-
social medias. Nonetheless,
We're so off track and off topic again. This
well,
one
Matt,
is my fault. I
You're
will
bringing
take
us
the
off
blame.
topic.
It's
Let
my fault
us
for this.
now regroup and let's move forward with this show.
Let's do it.
We're talking college basketball. Last segment, we're going to talk some college basketball. So all the college basketball haters out there who are just now retuning into this show that are hoping we're done talking about college basketball, we got about 10 more minutes or so. And then we're going to shift focus to Major League Baseball, and we'll talk about NFL and some of the coaching firings and some of the rumors that have been going around as well. But Matt, let's go and let's talk about college basketball. And this time we're going to talk about the top 25. And we talk about some of the teams that are on the bubble, on the outside looking in. Obviously, Dayton, if you were to extend the AP poll to 26 teams, Dayton would be number 26. If you were able to expand the AP poll to 29, Cincinnati would be at number 29. Now, that may falter, especially with their loss yesterday against Texas. But, Matt, and then Ohio State, they've been on that bubble on the outside looking in. Obviously, that loss against Indiana knocked them completely out of the bubble, but a win here tonight against Wisconsin could very well put themselves back in that bubble. Matt, there's a lot of teams here in the southwest region of Ohio that are on the bubble on the outside looking in that has a chance to get themselves in the top 25, if not this week, but next week. And Matt, as we mentioned, if Dayton were able to beat Duquesne on Friday, there would be a very good chance that Dayton could very well find themselves in the top 25. But I will go ahead and say this. Now with how last night went, that could be completely thrown out the window, even if they beat Duquesne how they should, because Texas was able to beat UC. But another team that's on the bubble on the outside looking in that got a big win yesterday was Iowa State. Iowa State now 12-3 so far on the season. They take down the only remaining undefeated team in all of college basketball, number 2, Houston. But they ended up winning that one 77-73. Remember, Dayton, they had a chance to beat Houston at the beginning of the season. They did not. They lost by 14. Iowa State was able to beat Houston in an in-conference game. And there's a very good chance that if everything goes Iowa State's way and if they can continue to win this week, Iowa State and the Cyclones, they may be closer and they may be able to jump UD getting into the top 25. And Matt, the reason why we're talking about this is that today is because you kind of alluded on this factor that we said, Dayton, if you practically win this week, you're in the top 25. But you even mentioned, I remember you saying on Monday, that it really just depends on some of the teams that are in the top 25 and some of the other teams that are on the bubble on the outside looking in. And Iowa State, just as you mentioned, they're a team on the bubble on the outside looking in. With a big win going up against Houston last night, Iowa State very well could make some leaps into the top 25. But not just Iowa State, there's also some other teams that are right there on UD's tail as well.
And yeah, the one good thing that, at least for UD's bid to be a top 25 team, we talk about, and like you brought up something that I was saying, we take a look at the teams that are currently inside the top 25, how their weeks have gone. Colorado State and BYU, when you take a look at ESPN's website, they both have 2 losses on the year, but now they're both at 3. So both of those two teams, it's very possible we could see. I wouldn't say it's too easy for Colorado State to drop down, but BYU, actually no, it could be possible for Colorado State because they've lost their last two. I think BYU's lost their last two games as well. But you talk about what needs to happen for UD to be a top 25 team. The first things first, beat Duquesne on Friday. That's the first thing you need to worry about if you want to end up seeing yourself as a top 25 team if you're the Flyers next week when the updated standings come out. But the fact that Colorado State, they've lost their last two games. I believe it was, Utah State, Boise State were their last two losses on the year, and they've lost 3 total games. And then you take a look at BYU. They obviously lost very recently to UC, and then they just lost to Baylor by 9. Earlier on in the year, they lost to Utah, so BYU, they now sit at 3 losses as well. When you take a look at ESPN's website, they have them at 12-2. They're now 12-3. Same can be said for Colorado State. It says they're 13-2, but I just listed off all 3 of their losses on the year. They're 13-3 right now. That's 17-18 in the top 25. Colorado State at 17, BYU at 18. It's totally possible. The more likely team to drop out would probably be Colorado State. BYU, with the fact that they just lost to UC, a team that is in the conversation for top 25, and then losing to Baylor, who's 14, it'd be a little bit tougher to have BYU slide completely from 18 all the way out after losing to a team that is around the top 25 and a team that is top 15 in the country. Colorado State, they lost to Utah State, who is currently number 20. Boise State, I'm taking a look. I don't even see them being given votes for a top 25 team, so that loss is going to hurt BYU a lot. Or no, that loss is going to hurt Colorado State a lot more. So for UD, like I said, first things first, beat Duquesne this week. That is your best bet of being a top 25 team. And the big question, like you brought up, you take a look at Iowa State. Is that win against Houston enough to push them into the top 25? Because the fact that it was a 4-point win at home against the only undefeated team left in the entire college basketball scene, it's totally possible that that win could end up propelling Iowa State into the top 25. But the only reason it might not is because their game prior to their game against Houston, 8-point loss to Oklahoma, who's currently number 9. So that could also impact and could hurt Iowa State being a top 25 team. But also that win against Houston could mean a lot more than that loss on the road against Oklahoma.
And Matt, there's certainly been a lot of up and down so far this season in college basketball. And Houston, there was an argument that you can make that they were the most dominant team in all of college basketball. But outside of really any team out there in college basketball, there's one team that to me now stands out than the rest. And you can make an argument for Kansas, Houston, obviously still as well, UConn, but Purdue and the Boilermakers, I think that they are the most dominant team right now in all of college basketball. And Matt, again, you can make an argument maybe with Kansas. Their only loss on the season was to Marquette, but they lost that game by 14 way back in game number 5 of the season. Sorry, I had to do a quick count there. But Purdue and the Boilermakers, to me, they look like the most dominant team in all of college basketball. Outside of them, we have not seen, at least in my opinion, enough consistency to talk about any other team being as dominant as Purdue, except maybe the Kansas Jayhawks.
And yeah, taking a look at Purdue, I would say strength of schedule-wise, they probably are the best team in college basketball. Obviously, these aren't the exact rankings of the team as we speak right now. I know Gonzaga is just around 23 or 22 in the country.
23.
Somewhere around that area. But at the time, they beat them as Gonzaga was number 11. They beat Tennessee when Tennessee was number 7. They beat Marquette when Marquette was number 4. They beat Arizona when Arizona was number 1. And they beat Illinois while Illinois was number 9. The only reason I would say they don't look like the best team is because obviously it's a Big Ten game on the road, but they got run over by Nebraska. 88-72 was the final of that game. And that was I think it was last night that we saw Purdue lose that game. So obviously it's a little bit more recency bias in why I'm saying they aren't the most dominant team in college basketball, because if they were the most dominant team against unranked conference opponents that do have 10 wins, you would see a win like we saw them have against Illinois, a win like we saw them have against Maryland. Against Nebraska, losing by 16. If it was like a 5-point loss, I would still 100% agree with you. And then that loss to Northwestern by 4. But a 16-point loss to Nebraska, to me, that doesn't shy them away from one of the best teams in college basketball. But I wouldn't say they are the standout, nobody's close to them, as the best team in college basketball.
Matt, not going to lie, I completely forgot to take that game into account. I completely forgot. You know what was funny was that you and I were talking about that game before the show. So everybody out there, I beg your pardon, scratch out what I said. And, you know, Purdue, this is a team that can still be one of the most dominant teams in the country. And even outside of that loss, Matt, as you said, it's a Big Ten game on the road against the Nebraska team, who's been a pretty good team so far this season. So obviously, tough game to win on the road. So, yes, you can knock Purdue by losing that game by 16, but at the same time, Purdue, with what they've been able to do outside of that game and outside of their strength and outside that strength of schedule they've played, they're certainly still at the top. Now with Houston and Purdue going all the way down, now the door opens up for Kansas or maybe possibly UConn if you could take care of Xavier tonight to be at the number 1 and the number 2 spot. Matt, so far this season, and in years past when it comes to college basketball, to me, Matt, it seems like there is a standout team that is the clear-cut favorite in college basketball at this point in the season. This season seems a little bit different, and it kind of seems like that in a sense. But we had the same conversation with college football as well. College football, there's always been a clear-cut favorite, number 1 team in the nation at the midway mark of the season. This year for college basketball, just like college football, there is no, oh, that's a dominant team. That's the team that should win it all. And Matt, you get the sense that that may open up the door for some of the smaller colleges and some of the smaller universities, especially in this Southwest region of Ohio, the region that you and I cover on this show, UD, UC, to possibly open up the door for them to get into March Madness and make a run, and not just get into March Madness because we're still 2 months away from March Madness. Still a lot of basketball to be played. By this time in 2 months, I can almost guarantee you we're going to be talking about a most dominant team in college basketball. But for right now, it opens up the door to see some of these teams that are on the bubble on the outside looking in, find a way to get into the top 25 and propel themselves and shoot themselves up the rankings. Because what you do now, you're building the foundation for your resume to possibly get into the tournament here come March.
And yeah, there's one thing that I want to bring up. I've talked about it I've seen it and thought about it so many different times, especially in college basketball when we're getting into conference play territory. How many times have we seen an unranked home team take down a top 25 team? Take a guess what games we've got tonight. Virginia Tech, unranked at home against 21 Clemson. Mississippi State, unranked at home against number 5 Tennessee. UCF, unranked at home against number 3 Kansas. North Carolina, number 7, they are on the road against unranked North Carolina State. Xavier, unranked at home against number 4 UConn. Ohio State, unranked at home against Wisconsin.
I see the trend.
There's one more game of ranked teams. TCU, unranked at home against Oklahoma. Obviously, what I'm saying could end up meaning nothing by this point tomorrow, and we see all those ranked teams I just mentioned win. But like I said, when it comes to this point of the season, you talk about seeing a clear-cut favorite. Another thing we see a lot of at this point of the season is a highly ranked team on the road against a conference opponent and they lose. I'm hoping we get to see some of that tonight, not just because Xavier and Ohio State both play as home teams, but I think it's going to make it a lot more fun seeing, and you talked about there not being a clear-cut favorite and a clear-cut team that looks the most dominant over everybody. That's only going to add to that statement and make it more valid as the season goes on.
Matt, I get the common trend of the games you were listing off. They all play NCAA college basketball.
That is not where I was going with that. There's 9.
Just kidding. I mean, they're unranked teams going against teams in the top 25. And frankly, tonight, it seems like we talk about some of the big games that are going to be played in the state of Ohio, again, the region that we cover on this show. But it seems like that could be the common theme for the entire nation. There's going to be a lot of movement to not necessarily tonight, because the AP poll is not going to be like, we have to put out the new rankings right now. They're going to wait until the weekend, obviously, and we'll be talking about it on our Monday show. But this could be a prelude to seeing a lot of the teams on the move. A lot of teams shaking up in the top 25. Certainly looking forward to it. Time for a break. And for all the non-college basketball lovers out there, good news for you. We are done talking college basketball for the day. Unless
something comes up.
Just kidding. Major League Baseball talk coming up when we return. The Cincinnati Reds, their man over the last, I believe, 15 years, Joey Votto, still on the market, and it does not seem as if he's drawing much interest, or at least much interest known to the media. It doesn't make sense for the Cincinnati Reds to bring back their leader for a locker room presence on a short deal and a farewell tour. Wait and see. That's all coming up next when we return.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Well, we were going to talk Major League Baseball.
That
We
might have to
still
wait.
might.
That might have to wait for tomorrow, though.
It may have to wait till tomorrow. We still might talk Major League Baseball, but we have a change in the program. And obviously, this is a inadvertent change. We did not want to make this change,
It just happened.
but it just happened. Breaking news posted 6 minutes ago from ESPN. Alabama's head coach Nick Saban is officially retiring from being the head coach at Alabama. What a shocker. And frankly, what a shocker, but what a career from Nick Saban. And he's going to go down as the all-time great head coach for college football.
Yeah, there's really no other way of putting it. As much as I don't really like Alabama all that much, Nick Saban will go down as one of, and if he's not number one, it is a very close number two in a lot of people's eyes, the best head coach in college football history. You take a look at the fact that 6 national championships with Alabama, tons and tons and tons of playoff appearances in the college football playoff era. There might have been maybe a year or two when Alabama wasn't even in the conversation. And when I say wasn't even in the conversation, I think they had 1 year where they ended up 11th in the country at the end of the regular season, and I think they went on to beat Michigan in their bowl game. But taking a look at Alabama, past decade, past 15 years, Alabama has always been in conversations for being a top 3, maybe even at worst, top 5 team in college football. So it's definitely, by far, definitely the end of an era there in Tuscaloosa. It's going to be hard to find a replacement for a coach who is going to go down as, in my book, the best college football coach of all time.
Now, the main question with once again, we're talking Nick Saban, breaking news, retiring from Alabama after 17 seasons, 6 titles as the Alabama head coach, and ultimately I'll go out there and say it right now, the greatest coach that we've seen in college football ever. He is the greatest college football coach that we have ever seen, and he's retiring. So a big loss now for Tuscaloosa. And you look at, now let's go in and let's take a glance at because Alabama, after learning that and after it was reported now 5 minutes ago, Alabama, they probably knew this a little bit longer than the media and everybody else did. But as of right now, this is a shocking news. And Alabama, currently as we speak, has got to be on the phone making calls because, let's face it, there's not going to be a single coach out there who can replace Nick Saban. But at the end of the day, you have one of the top programs. You were a Final Four team in college football. You're going to be returning quite a bit as long as, obviously, transfers. Now we may see a group of Alabama players transfer out of Tuscaloosa now because of the loss of Nick Saban. We may see a group start to transfer in once the new coach is hired. But obviously a lot of decisions now to be made for Alabama. And the main question is, do you have your new head coach in-house who sat under Saban and is ready for this moment, or do you look elsewhere? That is right now the biggest question in college football surrounding Alabama, who's been the most dominant program over the last 17 seasons under Nick Saban.
And yeah, like I said, it's going to be tough to find anybody. Like you said, there probably isn't going to be anybody, no matter who it is, that is going to be Alabama's next head coach that is going to be able to do what Nick Saban did. Now that I say that now, watch Alabama just win 10 straight national championships in the 12-team playoff format, and their new head coach goes down as the best college football head coach in history. But yeah, it's going to be really tough for Alabama, I would say, to find a coach that is even going to be 3/4 as good as Nick Saban was, maybe even half as good as Nick Saban was, because like I said, in his tenure at Alabama, there might have been a year or two where they weren't in conversations for a BCS championship or a college football playoff appearance in his time at Alabama. It was few and far between when we were having years where Alabama wasn't in the talks, and even if those years where they weren't in the talks of making it to the BCS championship or making it into the college football playoff, they were outside looking in to making it into the CFP or making it into the BCS championship game way back before the college football playoff was introduced. But talking about Nick Saban as a coach at Alabama, it's safe to say, like I said, I don't know if anybody around the country is ever going to be able to find a head coach that is as good as Nick Saban was for Alabama, because that's just how good he was for the Crimson Tide. There's probably not going to be another coach like Nick Saban. I would probably say give it 30 to 40 years, and maybe we might see somebody who does just as good. But Nick Saban will go down as, like I said, some people aren't going to put him at number 1 because they despise Alabama. But if you don't have that bias, and I know I don't like Alabama myself, but Nick Saban will go down as the best college football coach in college football history.
And Matt, you have to go in and talk about it ultimately seems, and again, this is breakout. I'm looking at my phone and I'm seeing all these notifications pop up about Nick Saban retiring, and it is a shocker. And, as much as you may despise, I know that there's a lot of people out there, especially in Ohio, because Ohio State and Alabama, they've had some rivalries over the last 10 years or so. But again, when you look, and let's take a glance into Nick Saban. He's going down as, I think it's a no-brainer. He is the best college football coach of all time. He is the number one coach. And it's funny because when you see him winning, and just in general, when you see players succeeding and when you see the success, you can't stand it. But once you realize it's the end of an era and you were able to witness the greatest player of all time or the greatest coach of all time, it leaves a little bit of a somber tone, especially when we're talking right now on this show about him parting ways. Matt, I don't remember a time where he was not the coach for the Crimson Tide of Alabama. And again, when you witness greatness, it's just crazy how you may not enjoy it. And then when it's over and that player is retired or gone, it leaves a somber tone because you look back at everything you made and you understand that maybe that's not your favorite team you're rooting for, and maybe it is one of your biggest rivals, but at the end of the day, you look back at it and at least I do this, you say to yourself, man, I wish I was able to enjoy that a little bit more because I'm never going to be able to see that. There's a good chance I'm never going to be able to see that again in my life. Or if I am able to see it again in my life, who knows when, and it's the same situation. Nick Saban leaving Alabama and retiring is the equivalent to Tom Brady retiring to the NFL. When Bill Belichick walks away from New England and walks away from coaching, it could be the equivalent to Bill Belichick walking away. And there's a very good chance that still may happen this same offseason as well. It was the same exact factor when Michael Jordan ended up leaving the Chicago Bulls. When you witness, you can even say the same with LeBron James leaving Cleveland. And when he ends up retiring as well in the future, you could probably say the same thing about him and all the all-time greats out there. No matter how you feel about them, whether you've enjoyed your time or whether it has, you're like, oh man, all he does is win. I'm tired of seeing him. When it's over, at least myself, I'm left with a somber tone, and I wish I was able to enjoy it a little bit more. And Nick Saban, without a doubt, going to go down as the greatest football coach in college football history. And again, as I mentioned, Alabama, they need to be on the phone lines right now. There were a lot of shocking changes at the NFL level at the coaching staff. Does Alabama have their replacement in-house? I think that would be their best option because whoever is in-house has been able to watch Saban. They know the offense. With staying in-house, it's going to avoid a gap year that we talk about multiple times on this show between getting a new coach, them getting their recruits in, just like we see a lot through college football. But if you have a replacement in-house, more than likely you're going to keep the majority of your players. You may even bring a few more in. You're going to bring more in than what you're going to lose. And then you can keep that stardom of Alabama football ready and pristine, ready to go. But you look at the NFL level and how many coaches have lost their jobs as a bit of a shocker. Mike Vrabel, we talked about him yesterday on the show. Maybe he comes to mind. I don't know if he'd be a good fit for Alabama, but he's certainly a name to possibly keep an eye out on, and a name that could also keep an eye out on. This is another shocker and breaking news as well. We were going to announce this a little bit later on in the show, but Pete Carroll done with the Seattle Seahawks. So now the Seahawks are in the market of a new coach, and Pete Carroll, it seems as if, now obviously I don't know him personally, but it seems as if from some of his press conferences, he has some interest in continuing to coach. So if that's the case, does he go back to the collegiate level where he started? A lot of what ifs, and this offseason already, it's funny because college football, we've been in the offseason now officially for 2 days. For NFL, we've been in the offseason now officially for 3 days. For some teams, obviously still some playoffs going on. But at the end of the day, this offseason already just within the first week of college football in the NFL has a lot of movement and a lot of motion that if it foreshadows what we see in the upcoming months for the offseason for football, I mean, buckle your seatbelts because it's going to be a roller coaster of a ride.
Yeah, it's safe to say it would be interesting. You talk about some of the NFL coach firings that we've seen. Imagine we see Pete Carroll being a head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide next season, a coach who has experience at the collegiate level, won a national championship. I believe it was he was back around 05 time. I think it was against Oklahoma who USC played to win the national championship. But I know he at USC was 1-1 as a head coach in national championship games. So Pete Carroll's got experience when it comes to college football and when it comes to making runs with good teams in college football. And then we saw the Legion of Boom in Seattle, Super Bowl going to the Seahawks. So I would say, especially if Pete Carroll is super interested in still being a head coach, what would not be a better job for Pete Carroll than to go be the successor to Nick Saban, who's going to go down as the best collegiate football coach in history? What would stop Pete Carroll from, if he's still truly interested and he still wants to coach, he got his roots in college football. He got his roots to propel him to the NFL with what he was able to do with the USC Trojans back in the early 2000s. So early to mid 2000s, I should say. So talking about potential successors to Nick Saban, obviously, Alabama could easily do what Ohio State did when Urban Meyer left and have, I wouldn't say it has to be offensive coordinator, but have a coach in the system step up to be the new head coach of the team. And like you said, that pays benefits because that coach has been around the system for some time and they know what they're getting themselves into. They know how to, I wouldn't say be the head coach of the team, but they know what the team's like. They know how the team plays. They know the attitude of the team. So if it's an in-house coach becoming the new head coach at Alabama, that would work perfectly fine for the Crimson Tide. And I would say there's probably not going to be too many missteps this upcoming season. But you mentioned Mike Vrabel as well. Pete Carroll comes to mind as a potential successor, but it's safe to say Alabama, I would say even if they don't have the best head coach in the world coming in to be their head coach next season, with it being Alabama, we talked about them having a quote-unquote, at least earlier on in this past season, we talked about this year being an off year, and look where they ended up. Number 4 in the country, making it into the college football playoff. So Alabama, I don't think there's really going to be any issues when it comes down to the team as a whole throughout the next few years without Nick Saban, but if there's going to be any areas where we see them struggle, it might be the first few weeks of next year, and that's probably going to be it because it's Alabama. They're going to find ways to win. If it's offensive or defensive, Alabama, as a program, knows how to win football games.
And obviously, there's a lot of sources confirming this as well. Yahoo Sports confirmed it. ESPN has confirmed it. Sports Illustrated has confirmed it. Adam Schefter has been talking about it as well. So, I mean, it's breaking news. It's all over. It's enough breaking news that you're going to be able to tune in just to your regular nightly news and be able to hear the news as well. But obviously, again, a lot of options and a lot of decisions coming up for Alabama. And if Alabama wants to optimize their window of the offseason and continue to keep some of the players and maybe possibly bring, because right now, let's face it, the transfer portal without Alabama having a head coach is really in a standstill point. There's not going to be transfers moving. There's not going to be transfers coming in. We may see more transfers leaving than anything else. But Alabama, I'm sure that they've known that this was coming. I'm sure that they have a backup in place. And I'm sure that it's going to be an in-house coach that's going to take that position. To me, I think that makes the most sense. But if they are looking outside, it just so happens that Pete Carroll, again, he was let go from the Seattle Seahawks today. And then hours later, Nick Saban resigns. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's a match made in heaven. But a lot to unfold, a lot to talk about there. We'll keep our eyes on that in the coming days. Time for a break. More talk coming up on Sports Now when we return.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We were going to talk some Major League Baseball, and we're going to have to postpone that a little. We're going to have to postpone that to tomorrow.
Yeah, we might not have time to do that, especially with the fact that we've got
We have another segment we want to get in.
Yeah, NFL talking about all the coaches and the moves that we've seen, and then we want to get hot takes in as well. So we're probably not going to have time to talk MLB stuff today.
And we would have had time, but breaking news takes priority. And obviously, Nick Saban, the greatest college football coach of all time, retiring, is certainly breaking news.
Should take number one priority once you get the update and the notification from a lot of different sports outlets saying, hey, the best college football coach ever just retired. That kind of takes priority over whatever we wanted to talk about. So there's a reason we decided to pivot and talk about Nick Saban.
So, nonetheless, Major League Baseball talk tomorrow. Should the Reds re-sign Joey Votto? That's going to be postponed and pushed back to tomorrow. We're talking about that very first. We're talking about that for the first 15 to 30 minutes, however long it takes. We're also talking the playoff scenarios tomorrow for football. We'll make our game picks, yada, 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 yada. Matt, let's move on to the NFL. Now, since that's all cleared up, we'll have our hot takes here in about 10 to 15 minutes of this show. But, Matt, let's move forward. Let's talk about the NFL. And the NFL, a lot of coaching. Obviously, there's been a lot of coaching changes. Arthur Smith is out of Atlanta. Mike Vrabel, he is out now of Tennessee. He's the top name on the market. Pete Carroll's now out of Seattle. Ron Rivera was let go from the Washington Commanders. And Matt, not to mention, there are a lot of coaches that are drawing a lot of interest. And Matt, a lot of these coaches that are drawing the interest, one of the big name coaches coming from the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati offensive coordinator Brian Callahan has already had an interview with the Los Angeles Chargers. It has been reported that he should have a second interview on the way. Matt, not to mention the fact that Brian Callahan also has been requested for an interview with the Carolina Panthers. So he's picking up a lot of traction. He's one of the top names right now currently for head coaches, not just on those couple of teams, but across the entire National Football League. And again, when you look at the Players Association and their top 5 offensive coordinators on the NFL season this year, Brian Callahan was number 4. And it makes sense because Brian Callahan certainly had a lot to do with changing up the scheme to switch it from a Joe Burrow offense to a Jake Browning offense. So rightfully so, Brian Callahan he was a name last year that was being floated around, didn't get a gig. This season, there's a very good chance that he could get a gig. But so let's look at this. If Cincinnati were to lose their offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan, this season, who would get a coaching job somewhere else, I believe, in my opinion, would have the offensive coordinator replacement in-house. That's their quarterback coach, Dan Pitcher. Dan Pitcher, he was up for a couple of offensive coordinating jobs last season. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers asked him to come in and I think that they offered him the offensive coordinator position, but Cincinnati ended up giving him a contract extension. He came back to Cincinnati, said that it was what they were building in the city of Cincinnati was too special to walk away from. That's something that you don't necessarily see coaches do. So Brian Callahan leaves. Dan Pitcher would be next in line, at least I would expect, to take that offensive coordinator role. But if he does not leave, Brian Callahan may stay. We may also see Dan Pitcher, the quarterback coach for Cincinnati, who also should get a lot of credit for getting Jake Browning ready to play for Cincinnati to keep them in that playoff race all the way up until week 17. We could see him on his way out for an offensive coordinator position elsewhere, just like we did last season. A lot of movement, a lot to talk about, and a lot to sort out, and especially with some of the coaches that left as early as today was Pete Carroll leaving. Who's going to take over the Seahawks? The Seahawks right now in a good situation. Who's going to take over the Titans? A lot of movement across the National Football League and something to keep an eye out on. And we're talking about this because Cincinnati Bengal coaches certainly have a lot of impact on what's going to happen in the coaching market.
Yeah, and it's safe to say everything that's gone on when it comes to the coaching market in the NFL, the craziness and everything that we're about to see happen during this offseason, well, for teams that didn't make it into the playoffs, it's only just begun. With how much that's happened, it's going to be absolute insanity if it has only just begun. And one thing that I saw talking about Pete Carroll being essentially canned by the Seattle Seahawks, the one thing that I saw that I thought was the funniest, I keep talking about Tom Grossi here and there, but I love the skits and the little videos that he does. It was Seattle Seahawks fans' reaction to Pete Carroll being fired. And at one point, there was a Titans fan sitting on a couch saying, "Hey, you can come join us now. You can come join the couch of fans who didn't really want to see their head coach go, but here we are." So it's safe to say there were probably a few Seattle fans that weren't really wanting Pete Carroll to be around, but they would probably be younger Seattle Seahawks fans with what Pete Carroll has done for that city and for that team over his tenure as the head coach. And it's safe to say, like I said, when it comes down, especially with the fact that you now have Pete Carroll in the minds of all the different teams in both college and NFL that decided to change up their coaching positions a little bit. You've got Mike Vrabel also now on the market for another team, or for another team to try to pick him up and potentially make him that team's head coach. It's safe to say, though, like I said, when it comes down to all the craziness we've already seen throughout the first few days of, as you said, Black Monday for coaches in the NFL, it's safe to say it's probably going to continue to be craziness and chaos, I would say, until the Super Bowl is over. We're probably going to see a bunch of different moves, and even after that, we're going to see more moves come out from different coaches. We could see offensive coordinator from, and this is just a random pitch out here or anywhere, say the offensive coordinator from the 49ers if they win the Super Bowl. We could see that offensive coordinator get a start or get a head coaching job at a different team in the NFL. And like you mentioned with the Cincinnati Bengals, that's one thing that you see when you have coaches that aren't the head coach be super, super successful at their position. It can elevate their position to a higher, I wouldn't say a higher up job, but from a offensive coordinator to a head coach. We've seen that happen so many different times in the NFL. We've seen that happen so many different times in college football. I mean, for me, being an Ohio State fan, Ryan Day comes to mind. He was the offensive coordinator for Ohio State for some time. Urban Meyer decided to leave, and then we saw Ryan Day step up and take that position. So talking about all the different movements that we've seen so far, I think we've only scratched the surface as to what we're going to see happen in the coaching market this offseason. And like I said, I feel like from here on out, it's only going to get crazier.
And Matt, also now let's shift focus away from the from the coaching market across the National Football League. There was some stuff that was said today on SportsCenter, on ESPN, their show SportsCenter. They had T. Higgins and Jamar Chase both live on air for an interview, and they were asked who they think will win the Super Bowl. Jamar Chase came out and said, anybody but the Chiefs. And Matt, here's my question to you, because I certainly think over the last 3 seasons, we've now seen the Bengals Chiefs play every single year in the regular season. We've now seen them play back-to-back years in the AFC Championship game. Obviously, that's not going to happen this season. But the Bengals and the Chiefs, in my opinion, outside of any divisional game across the National Football League, is becoming the biggest rivalry outside of divisional rivalries in the NFL, with what's been happening with the Bengals winning 3 straight, knocking off the Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium to go to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and then winning that next game in the regular season. Everything that was being talked about between Jamar Chase and some of the other Bengal players, the Chiefs players were talking as well. L'Jarius Sneed calling T. Higbee, referencing Tyler Higbee from the Los Angeles Rams. I'm talking about him, saying that he was going to lock him down, didn't even know his name. Jamar Chase responded with some words that we cannot say on air. It's floating around. We probably could say it on air. I don't want to say it on air. But, and then everything that was being said. And then, of course, heading into the AFC Championship game last year with the Bengals calling Arrowhead Stadium Burrowhead Stadium, the Chiefs ended up winning that one to go to the Super Bowl, win another Super Bowl ring. In the offseason, there was a lot of talk about who's the best quarterback in the NFL. Jamar Chase said Joe Burrow. And then Joe Burrow said it's Pat. And Jamar Chase responded saying, Pat who? And Patrick Mahomes put up on Instagram a picture with his 2 Super Bowl rings saying, that's who. Clever play there, by the way, by Patrick Mahomes. But there's just been a lot of talk off the field. And then obviously this year when they played, a lot of things that were being said. Jamar Chase was asked what stands out about the Chiefs defense. He said nothing. There was a lot of backlash from that. Certainly, I don't think that there should have been much backlash on that, because if you recall, some of the Chiefs players were saying the exact same thing about the Bengals offense just last season, and it seems like the entire NFL and the entire league wanted to forget that the Chiefs said the exact same thing last season that Jamar Chase said this season. But of course, it was a huge uproar. There were some fights that were happened in the regular season. Jamar Chase, L'Jarius Sneed, and really what the trash talk that's gone into this game and the high-stake game that has come down, that has been played between the Bengals and the Chiefs over the last couple of years, 5 matchups over the last 3 years. Matt, I'll go out there and say, outside of any divisional rivalry in the NFL, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Kansas City Chiefs have blossomed into the biggest rivalry.
It's definitely been one of the biggest rivalries when it comes to out-of-division teams. Like you mentioned, obviously, Cleveland playing against Cincinnati, they're not going to like each other. Cincinnati playing against Pittsburgh, they're not going to like each other. But with how feisty it's been the past few years between the Chiefs and the Bengals, I don't doubt that at all, that's one of the biggest rivalries. I would say Chiefs-Bills also might be in that conversation as well for biggest out-of-division rivalry in the NFL right now. But I think you got to tip the hat. You have to acknowledge Kansas City versus Buffalo, but I think you have to tip your hat at that and acknowledge that Kansas City versus Cincinnati is probably the biggest rivalry right now outside of division games and divisional rivalries in the NFL as we speak.
They play again next season. Looking forward to that. Time for a break. Hot Take Wednesday coming up next when we return.
let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hey!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hey!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Time for Hot Take Wednesday. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. Man, it's been a fun show.
It is.
Sad to see it end. I think probably the most fun show that we've done.
It's been a ton of fun, but this is not about to be Hot Take Wednesday. It's about to be Rapid Fire, the segment we used to have. So,
Hot Take Wednesday, go for it.
my hot take, talking about all the college basketball teams from the Southwest area and Ohio State potentially being top 25 teams here in the next few weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point during the year, UD ends up being a top 12 team in college basketball. If they keep winning, and if everything keeps happening around them to make it to where they could be a top 12 team or a top 15 team at that, I wouldn't be surprised if UD could end up inching their way towards top 12 in college basketball. Not at the end of the year, or not at the end of the regular season, but at some point this year, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happen.
Here's my hot take, Matt. Xavier takes down. I fat fingered the wrong
You're
video.
hitting every button right now.
I fat fingered the wrong video. Nonetheless, we have this music to close out our show. I fat fingered it.
You hit every button over
Well,
there.
I'm looking at the camera and I'm trying to go.
You don't have to look at the camera.
Either way, we only have a minute left. Xavier takes down UConn. They get their season back on track tonight. They win it at the Cintas Center. Alongside Matthew Pennington, I'm Jackson Lightcap. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for dealing with us on Sports Now. A fun show ends in funny fashion. We're live tomorrow, 4 to 6. We'll talk to you then.